Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Nick here, talking science of endurance and everything sports science in general. Welcome to the second live stream on the channel. So thanks for joining me tonight, jumping on. I thought I'd just do it on a Wednesday night, 7 o'clock. Did put out on my Instagram over the weekend asking for some suggestions, and midweek, this sort of time slot in terms of Australian time anyway, and the time zone sort of worked for a few people. So going to be sticking with this for a little bit, but I might try a few different time zones and times throughout the week because I know it suits different people at different times. Will, thanks for jumping on and saying hello. Big shout out to you for the support. But hopefully we get a few jumping in over the next little while. But I guess a bit of a rundown of what we're going to be talking about today is a few things to do with the live streams that are coming up in the next little while. Hey Josh, how you doing? But also my thoughts on the finish up of the Tour de France, obviously finishing up over the weekend, and our first Grand Tour of the year is wrapped up. It's obviously the biggest one, so definitely something that we've been following. Of course, most of us in the endurance industry have been following over the last while, and we had some surprises, and obviously the winner was a bit of a surprise to everyone. So go through a little bit of that, and then I'm happy to open it up and take some questions about sports science of endurance as we move through, and hopefully get a few more in over the next couple of minutes to lead into that Q&A bit at the back end. So first of all, something for everyone who's watching on the replay, if you are joining in on these lives, or for the guys who are in there now, we do have a feature on YouTube where we have what's called a super chat feature. So when you see the chat box on the right hand side, you'll notice there is a square box with a little dollar sign on it. By no means do you have to feel obliged to use that, but it does help support the channel. So it just provides a little donation. What it's also going to allow me to do is definitely see your comment if it's coming through and we get a few people commenting quite regularly. I'll bring your comment up on the screen and we'll give you a bit of a shout out as well. But it's just a way to support the channel. Obviously, I'm trying to do this as best I can and just create great content for you guys rather than sort of worry about fancy equipment and things like that. But it is obviously a way to help support if you have been enjoying the content. So, like I said, by no means do you feel like you need to, but if you do want to hit that super chat button and make a little donation to the channel to keep everything going in support, I definitely really appreciate it. So let's get into the Tour de France results, and I'm going to bring it up onto the screen here if I can get my screen share up and running. So hopefully you can see that. Just give me a thumbs up in the chat if you can see on the screen the Tour de France results. I'm actually going to let's start with the GC, because I think this is a really interesting one in terms of what we saw play out over the course of the Tour this year. Obviously, we know Pogačar got the win at the end of the day, and a pretty impressive result from a 21-year-old, just turned 22, I think, this week. So to take out the Tour at that sort of age, I think he's the second youngest in history to take it out. Is a pretty impressive effort. Obviously great as an Australian. I'd love to see Richie Porte up on the podium finally. It's about well overdue that he jumped up onto the podium to take his rightful spot up there. Definitely someone who's obviously earned it. Roglic, I think, rode really well over the course of the Tour. We got some of the sort of, I guess, stalwarts of the top 10. Adam Yates probably a little bit lower than what he would like, and I didn't think he really sort of had it. Looked like in some of the key stages, some of those key climbs, he was sort of slipping out the back a bit. Dumoulin was strong in the time trial. Enric Mas is another young one that I think is sort of showed a bit at various stages as well, and Landa's obviously a strong rider. So overall, we've got this interesting finish to the Tour where we have 21-year-old winning at the end, and something that we don't often see in endurance sports, and that's why I want to talk about it. And something a bit interesting is we've got this guy who, by all development reasons, by genetics, the way that our body develops, he shouldn't really be necessarily this aerobically fit. We have a look at all the previous winners of the Tour de France. They're usually well into their 30s by the time they win. Obviously, the guys around him, obviously Richie Porte's been around for quite a while. We develop that endurance a lot later on. It takes a little bit longer to develop compared to things like speed and power. So that's why we see at the Olympic Games, your 100-meter sprinters are always in the sort of early to mid-20s. They really struggle to keep maintaining a bit of a career in the sprinting side of things into their late 20s and 30s. It's the same with team sports, footballers, soccer players, etc. They really struggle as they get older because the game just gets away from them because it's a bit faster, and it's hard for them to keep up and provide that same explosive ability. We see it in sprinters too. And that's where guys who've been able to maintain over such a long period of time in terms of sprinting is quite impressive. Guys like Sagan, for example, has obviously been around for quite a while, but he's not exactly old yet, so he's still doing pretty well. But this also was a really interesting one because we now have a guy who has this incredible endurance capacity at a very, very young age, who then also went on to take out King of the Mountain. So I'll flip over here just to bring it up again. If it's being a bit slow, there we go. who also managed to take out the King of the Mountain, and fairly convincingly. I mean, 82 to 74 points in the end. I think it was the time trial they got it for him. Those last little points on the time trial stage up the climb at the end, but then he also, because of his age, took out the white jersey. So we've got a scenario where one guy taking out 3 jerseys at the end of the Tour de France is a pretty impressive feat. So I think he's definitely, obviously, one to watch in the future, but I think we should also be a bit cautious of how he goes over the next few years of his career. This is a classic sign for me of potentially someone who's incredibly talented, incredibly fit, genetically, I guess, perfect for the sport. Does he burn out and does he sustain a long, successful career? Is this a one and done type scenario, or is this something we're going to see time and time again? He's going to be on the podium, potentially win multiple tours. That's something I'm definitely looking forward to over the next little while. Is he going to be able to replicate it time and time again? Not sure if he's going to be racing any of the other Grand Tours, and I'm going to get to some of that news in a minute in terms of what we saw play out beginning of the Tour de France and now heading into the Giro and the Vuelta. But potentially, if he goes and rides one of those, I would assume maybe the Vuelta being the second one, but at this stage, probably unsure. It'd be interesting to see how he backs up being so young as well. I guess the chronic load and not being on the tour in terms of the World Tour and year in, year out just yet. Like some of these more seasoned guys, if we head down the list of even just individual, you have a look at guys like Yates, obviously, has been around for a while. If we go down a little bit more, I had this open just before. Valverde still finished top 12. I think I saw Quintana down at 17th, Roland. All these guys who've been racing year after year after year after year, have got this massive chronic training load, if you like, that they're able to back up and potentially do 2 tours. It'd be very surprising if he did back up, if he did back up, if he does any well at these upcoming ones. Interesting to see a new green jersey as well. Sam Bennett, well done to him. Clearly took out 380 points. He was just under 100 points over the top of Sagan. One in terms of the tour where I think there wasn't much emphasis on potentially the sprinting. Everything was sort of on what the COVID protocols and crowds being at the race and not at the race. We saw some stages where in some of those hotspots through France where there weren't any crowds. But again, good to see someone new coming through. I'm a big fan of Caleb Ewan. I think he's going to be a gun. So and he's just growing year on year and starts moving up the rankings every time he races. So it's the type of thing that good to see him up in the top 6 there. Ideally, try and push a little bit further. And we know if Sagan's just a class act and again coming in second, he probably would have wanted another green jersey at the end of the tour. But I don't think anyone's going to sort of complain about someone else having a turn at the top. In terms of the team, this actually surprised me that Movistar took out the team category at the end there. I didn't actually think I probably just didn't see him enough in particularly the last sort of couple of stages, and I probably was a tour that I didn't pay as much attention in some parts as I would normally. In terms of watching it, again, everything that's gone on is a potentially impacted tour. We had some of the big names taken out, which is the news I'm going to get to now. In terms of, we obviously know that this was the big story of the tour to begin with. That Froome and Thomas were dropped from the Ineos roster heading into it. They're both going to respectively race. I think it says down here they're going to race the Vuelta and the Giro as team leaders in their own right, which interesting decision. I can understand why Ineos might have wanted to do it, but at the same time, you're dropping guys who have proven that they can win it. And then interesting that partway through the tour, the other big news story of Bernal pulling out with injury. It's quoted here as, I think, a back in knee trouble. Whether that's a cover for lacking form and not doing too well, I don't know. Carapaz actually did not too bad as their initial, final backup rider, if you want to call it that. The backup to the backup to the backup. He actually did okay. I think he might have snuck in, top 15 there, so 13th he finished, and he was the highest out of all the Ineos. Again, similar to the green jersey, I'm not too disappointed that Ineos didn't win. I think we're all sort of due for a new winner, and good to see a smaller team like UAE take it out and show that they've got riders that can do it. But I think that did play a big factor in terms of having 2 guys who've clearly proven that they can win the tour quite convincingly. And even Thomas last year with Bernal sort of taking the win, Thomas was probably set up to win that tour, and it was that stage with the landslide that I think cost him in the end in terms of where he was placed on the road and strategy. So interesting way to finish it all up. I guess the big thing for me was the Tour was won on the time trial. I think that was a different look to what we got last year, where the Tour was won in somewhat controversial circumstances with that landslide happening, the race being called at the top of the mountain as opposed to allowing him to descend. I think last year Alaphilippe probably has a bit better chance at maybe trying to gain some time on the descent, but here it was. I always love tours that come down to the time trial personally, purely from the fact that it really shows who is the best rider out in the road at the time, who can put the most power down when it matters at the end, under fatigue, all of these factors, and you clear through. I mean, to be a minute 20 up on the likes of Dumoulin, who was probably tipped to win the time trial, and at the end of the Tour as well, second last stage, to be a minute 20 up as a 21-year-old, you've earned the Tour. As long as there's nothing untoward that we don't know behind the scenes, and as much as we wouldn't, I don't want to speculate in any way, but it's the type of thing that's a pretty impressive ride as such a young rider. Port, I think, time trialed really, really well. Have a look here, a few sort of names that don't really stand out too much, and I guess that's probably a byproduct of the potentially weaker field. We've got 3 tours that really not many riders are going to be backing up and doing all 3 this year, or even potentially 2. So it does reduce the field a little bit. Different preparation for all the different teams and all the different riders obviously leading in. That's the same for any other sport through the COVID period at the moment. We're going to see some different names on the list, but again, I really don't mind that at all. I think it makes for an interesting tour, and it's going to lead into an interesting set of races for the Vuelta and the Giro as well in terms of how they play out. Do we see Froome and Thomas, I guess, boost their stock in terms of potentially getting moved on to another team and signing some big contracts? I think Froome's already re-signed with is it Israel, I think, is the team he's signed for next season, moving out of Ineos. They're obviously trying to go for a younger look on the squad, and it's probably about time, but interesting that they're two, you would argue, they're 2 highest paid riders probably, and their most high profile riders would be an interesting move to get rid of both of them very quickly. You would think at least one maybe sticks around to sort of mentor Bernal like Thomas did last year. Be an interesting scenario to see what comes about. Got Aaron here, he's saying Van Aert impressed me. I'll bring a comment up on the screen because let everyone sort of see it here if it lets me click. Still getting used to some of this. Here we go. Maybe if I take off this. There we go. Van Aert impressed. As always, he's an impressive rider. Hard to transition from cyclocross to Grand Tour stage racing. I think he's another one to watch future. The more he rides Tour races and the less he rides cyclocross, I think the better he's going to get. That's just specificity, but it's the type of thing that, I mean, there's some young guys that are coming through that I think are really impressive, and we probably haven't, I guess, seen a group of young riders come through for quite a while. We've seen 1 or 2 come through each year, but it's the type of thing I don't think we've seen a handful, which is what we're kind of seeing at the moment with the likes of, obviously, Pogacar's a threat. Roglic is just getting better and better. Van Aert in 4th place is impressive for another young guy coming through. Enric Mas is another one who's quite young. We go down the list and you can just pick out all these young guys who are up and coming. It's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out and how this sort of does impact teams in going further into the future, and whether they start going down the younger path and we start to see a bit more of an emergence of some of these really young guys winning the tours, or whether it's just going to go back next year and even in the Giro and the Vuelta back to some of our classic mid-30-year-old athletes who've been there and sort of built the endurance over a number of years, which is the typical progression endurance sport. Again, this could be a bit of an anomaly, but hopefully it does continue because it does make for some, I guess, more exciting racing overall. So that's a little bit of my wrap. I might leave it there because I've sort of rambled on a little bit, but my wrap of what I thought about the tour. As we go through, let me know any comments. Aaron, thanks for that one, sending it through in terms of your thoughts on the tour, but let me know if you've had any thoughts or anything different, anything you're looking forward to maybe in the Giro or into the Vuelta as well. Interested to hear how it's going to play out. It's always a fun one to watch, the Tour de France. There's always so many twists and turns. You never really know what's going to come out of it in terms of who's going to win, who's going to crash, who's going to pull out, who might not even get selected is now something we have to talk about in future tours. So always something to really look forward to in the year, and hopefully we see a little bit more free crowd capacity and riders not having to mask up and then take their masks off as soon as they get to the start line and chuck them back on, and all of this goes away by next year and we can have a tour that we're a little bit more familiar with. So what I might do now is I'm going to open it back up to you guys who are watching. Thanks for you guys who have jumped in so far to join the live tonight. If you do have any questions that you want answered on the channel, I might actually kick things off with a question that came through in the comments earlier today that I thought was a really good one to share. But in terms of any other questions you do have, please leave them in the chat box and we'll get them answered right now. Question that did come through earlier today, and Aaron, actually, I think it was one of yours on the video that I was talking about training in the heat. Had a really interesting discussion about, well, how does this change in terms of, rather than just dry heat, when we get into periods of high humidity, how do these processes change overall? Is this something that we see anything different? Why is it probably harder for athletes to deal with the humidity? And the main reason is because what we now have in terms of an environmental condition, we now have so much more moisture in the air. Like humidity, essentially, when the humidity goes up, we have more moisture floating around in the air. What does that mean when we try to provide evaporative cooling? So if you've seen the video, or if you haven't, go check it out. It's up on the channel, talking about heat. But if you've seen that video, understand that the process that we go through to cool our body down through sweating is primarily through blood flow towards the surface of the skin. We release fluid in the blood towards the surface of the skin, so the plasma, that goes through the sweat glands. We then sweat. That water on the surface evaporates into a gas and it takes the heat with us. And it's what we call evaporative cooling. It's like the aircon in your house. That's how it works. That's our most effective method. But when we've got high humidity, what we end up having is a lot of moisture in the air. So that fluid on the surface that we're trying to release as sweat has nowhere to go. All it's going to do is just try to get into the atmosphere as a gas. But there's already so much, I guess, water or fluid in the atmosphere in terms of moisture. We can't get rid of it. It doesn't want to go that direction because, like anything, things move from high concentration to low concentration. If we've already got high concentration moisture in the air, it's not going to move. So you end up just having it stick to you. And that's why it's almost sort of harder, because then we're losing that ability to release through evaporative cooling that heat. And that's why it's, again, almost harder to be in a humid environment than it is to just be in a raw heat environment. Raw heat, you don't have to worry about the humidity. It's easy to have that evaporative process. If you pour some water over yourself as well, that water is just going to act like sweat also, and that is going to release into the atmosphere. So we have multiple ways of doing it, but in the humid environment, it's a real struggle because we don't have this evaporative cooling. So we have to rely on things like radiation of heat off our body and just trying to release it as best we can outside of it. It's a very difficult thing to do from a humidity perspective. So how do we then manage the humid temperatures? You just got to be smart about it in terms of understanding how is my body reacting, what is actually happening here. Similar to the heat, you need to bring things back a little bit, most likely in terms of intensity, particularly for your longer, slower stuff. Bringing the intensity back is going to help a little bit. Again, it's probably exaggerated, and things like heart rate are probably going to go up a little bit more because we're struggling to cool ourselves down even further. So it's really just the process of our internal thermoregulation isn't able to do its job as effectively because the external environment is inhibiting. And that's why races like Kona in Hawaii, if you race in Southeast Asia, Taiwan, Malaysia, these types of places are really, really difficult to compete in because you don't experience necessarily that type of humidity if you're coming from a different environment. You train and based in Melbourne, for example, you go through a Melbourne winter, you go race Kona, it's going to be hard regardless, but the humidity is what gets a lot of athletes rather than just the raw heat. So something to consider there. It's also a lot harder to adapt to the humidity aspect in terms of acclimatization. Raw heat, a little bit easier. Your body just deals in terms of improving some of the physiological responses to heat. Humidity is just adding that other factor. It just complicates it a little bit further. So hopefully that answered the question about why humidity is a little bit more difficult. It really comes down to our inhibition of our thermoregulatory processes, or basically our cooling system, not being able to do its job as effectively. We've got a couple of questions coming through in the chat, so we'll go through these ones now. Josh, I might start with yours. I'll bring it up on the screen so everyone can see it. What do you think the ideal balance of cycling versus running if you're an endurance runner but want to cross-train on the bike? So I'm going to make the assumption here that you're focusing on a running-based event. You're building up to, let's say, 5, 10K, etc., but you want to do a bit of cycling. It's a bit of extra fitness, but cross-training is what you're sort of talking about. I think at the end of the day, it comes down to, well, we need to balance our week out, but what is our primary focus in terms of specificity? Obviously, if we're a runner, running is our go-to. If you want to be a better runner, you need to practice running. If you want to be a better cyclist, you need to cycle. That's the logical starting point that we need to work through. What is your sport? So what is the most specific training for that sport at the end of the day? If we're then talking about, all right, how does things work in with cross-training, trying to do something different? I get this question a lot when we talk about like running with guys who want to go and swim. It's the other one because it's that off legs conditioning. It takes a bit of the load and the stresses off the body. It's a little bit more manageable to deal with. We can still get some of the aerobic benefit and all this, something a bit different. Really, it comes down to, well, where can we fit it in the week? If you're running, depends how many times you're running a week, and this is where it's a little bit tricky, but if you're running, say, 5 times a week, which is pretty sort of standard, 4 to 5 is a pretty typical for most athletes out there who are serious recreational runners, I'm going to put them in that category. You might be running 3 to 4 sessions a week, or even 2 to 3 if you're a little bit more sort of leisurely. If you're a little bit more on the serious side of things, you might be running closer to 6 to 7. Aaron, thank you for the super chat. Didn't have to, maybe appreciate it. Thanks for the question, as always. But in terms of, I guess, balancing it out, it really comes down to, we'll get the running out of the way first, and then where can we actually fit it? If you're running 5 times a week, you've probably got a mix of some high intensity and some long slow in there. What does that then do? That then means that, all right, you're probably going to go and do a bike session that's probably just ticking the legs over and a bit more recovery. I would think in most circumstances, because at the end of the day, we want our running to be quality. So that would probably, for me, if I was programming that, I'd probably look at, here's my five key sessions. I'd probably at most fit in 2 bike sessions, and they'd probably only be half an hour to 45 minutes max. It'd just be there just to turn the legs over. If we're then looking at maybe that runner who can only handle 3 to 4 sessions a week, you might then consider, all right, we might do 2 bike sessions, but one's going to be a bit longer, just to make up a bit of extra load. And I would typically use that in an example of an athlete who gets injured quite a lot as a result of high running volume. Just get the same aerobic benefit, but as a result of doing another modality, can be really useful to then be able to still progress from an aerobic perspective, develop our endurance capacity, but we're not having the stress on the joints, the tendons, the bones, etc. That works in a little bit better, but you'd then be starting to look at, well, okay, again, the specificity question. You don't need to go out and do a 3-hour ride. You can just go out and do an hour, or you're basically just substituting the running session that you would be missing. If you're starting to get up to that 6 and 7 run per week category, you're probably only really cramming in one ride a week if you're trying to do it as a cross-training session or swim, whatever it may be, mostly from the fact that you're just going to be pretty fatigued by the end of the week, unless you can handle that chronic training load. Like if you're a triathlete now, you're going into pure running, but you still want to keep a bit of bike. That's very different to if you're a runner and then trying to incorporate bike on top. You got to think about where have you come from in terms of how much preparation you've done. So I'd be saying, what is the ideal balance? $1 million question, really. I'd be prioritizing whatever your sport is, then doing maybe 1 to 2 cross-training sessions in the week is probably going to fit majority of people. Maybe it's a case of, do you want to go 1 bike session and 1 swim session? If you want to mix up even more, do you want to go 2 swims? Do you want to do 2 bikes? You don't necessarily have to do the same all the time. You might want to try, instead of doing a bike session, you might want to try something different, like a rowing ergometer instead. You've got to think about how it's going to work from a fatigue perspective, but then ultimately we need to be fresh and ready to go for our running sessions if you're a runner, or our bike sessions if you're a cyclist, etc. So hopefully that answers a little bit. Let me know in the comments, Josh, if that sort of covers your question and sort of what you were trying to ask there. It's a tricky one. It's like any programming question. We could go back and forth about, well, what about this little variable, this factor based on this individual? That also helps to provide that context in terms of understanding, well, what are the key parts to making the decision of how many cross-training sessions might we do, or maybe we just don't do any cross-training at all. You're better off just having complete recovery. It'll vary based on that individual factor. We'll go to the next one now. Again, thanks, Aaron, for the super chat. There you can see that green box. For anyone who's watching and wondering what that green box in the chat is, there's a super chat feature on YouTube in the chat down the bottom. You can click the little $sign in the grey square box. It is a way to just help support the channel, and Aaron has done so I really appreciate that. By no means do you have to, but if you do feel like you're getting plenty of value out of these live streams, out of the videos on the channel, it does help grow the channel and also help to support me to make this channel even better, get some new equipment and things like that. You can probably see the camera might be wobbling a bit because it's just on my desk at the moment, so a tripod is coming to help stabilize that, but we'll keep working through. Will's question here, we'll move on to the next one. I'm currently looking at buying a smartwatch. What would you recommend out of Apple Watch, Garmin, or Fitbit from a basic level training perspective for general sport and going to the gym? Great question, because there's so much out there. I have my opinions on this, and everyone you watch or listen to is probably going to have their own opinion in terms of what device is best. We actually had this conversation the other day discussing different devices, and it's the type of thing that I actually run 2 devices personally. I have an Apple Watch mainly for the fact I had it initially to try it out as a training watch, and found it wasn't really doing what I needed to in terms of GPS, using a lap button function, all of these types of things. I mainly use it for notifications during the day, general activity counting. So if I'm away on holidays, which I'm not going to be for any time soon, but if I'm away on holidays, I'm walking around just to see how much activity I'm doing through the day. I really like the feature that tells me to stand every however long, and most watches are going to have that. I enjoy the notifications that come through in terms of phone, things like that. I mainly use this for just day-to-day stuff. When I go into training, I use a Garmin Forerunner 735. You could use Suunto, you could use Fitbit. They're all going to give their own benefits. I like Garmin because I've used Garmin previously. I think they're rock solid. They do a reasonable job. People have their pros and cons about Garmin being inaccurate or accurate, or your data not being safe. We obviously saw Garmin had some issues not too long ago about not being able to find your data and what's going on, like hacking into the system and things like that. Any company's going to face that at some point, any tech company. So I think if you're wanting to go for something that's going to work on general usability, I'd probably, if you're looking at just general fitness, I'd probably say something like an Apple Watch or a Fitbit is probably pretty good if you want all that other functionality and more of a smartwatch. If you're more looking at performance though, I would go for something like a Garmin, or maybe look into, I haven't used Suunto personally, but I know they do reasonably well. Garmin is just obviously the I guess the biggest brand in the space, and they've been around for quite a long time, so their technology is pretty solid. If we're looking for hyper accuracy though, I sometimes also use a GPS unit in the back of my shirt, like what the AFL players and soccer players and things like that wear. I use that for the footy type stuff that I do. That's actually got a higher, what we call higher hertz GPS, so it sends more signals per second. You actually get a much more accurate reading, but I use that mainly when I'm doing maximal sprinting stuff. It doesn't have a display, so you can't look at it. You don't look at it post session, so that's a specialty in itself. Really comes down to what are you doing. If you're a team sport athlete, I'd probably recommend one of those. If you're a team sport athlete and you want to get some general fitness as well, you might also train for a marathon, 5K, something like that. I'd get a Garmin because you can get a reasonably cheap one. The 735 does a good job for multi-sport. There is a Forerunner, a 235, I think that's the one down that just does running. You can go up and get the 930, whatever one you want. You can go to any level. I think that's the bonus of Garmin. They have so many variations that you can really get into what do I actually need. And keep that in mind as well. What are the features I actually need and use? I didn't go up and get the 930, 935, whatever it's called, because I didn't necessarily need any of the extra features. I just needed the multi-sport features, which is why I ended up saving a bit of money. I also bought my Garmin as a bit of a tip through Gumtree. Was able to find a guy who does some testing for Garmin. He's an ex-professional cyclist. He tests a whole bunch of units, has a whole bunch of spare stuff. I also got my Garmin Edge from him as well. And you're able to find brand new watches pretty cheap that way. Kogan's another good website for Australia anyway. You get fast shipping, but also they have pretty sort of heavily discounted stuff. So look around, find what works for you, but have a look at the features and how do they align with the actual training you're going to be doing. I think is the best way to go about it overall. Next question, I might come back to, just while we're on the topic of it, Aaron, I'll come back to yours in terms of cramping in a moment, but I'll answer Josh's just because we're on the topic of it before. Talking about not much, when we're talking about running, how many times should we add in some bike sessions as cross-training? Says you're not running much at the moment, enjoying the bike with no events on the horizon. Usually I'd run 6 sessions a week with 2 quality days and a long run. So yeah, I think in that regard, having 2 rides in the week, pretty sort of comfortable intensity, shortish duration, like 30, 40 minutes sort of max, would be more than enough. And you probably find that's probably okay. And as you said here, 3 rides a week, mostly recovery or easy under an hour, you can probably get by. You just want to then consider, well, how much am I doing in the total week? And how many Ks are you accumulating running, and the fatigue aspect? Because sometimes doing a recovery ride, as most endurance athletes know, can very easily turn into more than what we thought or more than what we bargained for in terms of recovery. Can actually become we get a little bit ahead of ourselves and we push a little bit too hard. So sometimes it is better just to go and take a rest day or do a recovery session, whether that be go and walk through. I'm lucky I've got the beach down the road, so I can go walk in the water at the beach in the cold. I can walk through, I can go through and use, if you've got recovery boots or you've got foam rollers or you want to do some mobility, other things like this could also be beneficial to providing that recovery aspect as well. So just be mindful of that. But yeah, working 2 to 3 in, as long as they're sort of pretty comfortable and easy, can really work in well for your running. Because like I said, all as far as if you took out a long, slow run, you could just keep that bike session in there and maybe just boost the volume a bit. You're still going to get the general aerobic adaptation. It's just we're taking the load off the body, so we're not as fatigued from an impact perspective and all these factors. We're now we're now working on the aerobic side of things, and we can actually manage our body a little bit better. So yeah, definitely worth adding in. I'll come back to your question now, Aaron. We'll jump it up on the screen in a second here. Do you have any tips for preventing cramps? I tend to seize up on long rides. This is an interesting one, actually, and I think I might go through and collate the research. I actually answered a question on this specific question in the comments section of another video today. And so I might put up a dedicated video to it, because I know it's an issue a lot of athletes have problems with. To be completely honest, there is some, I guess, differing thoughts on what actually causes cramping. You can argue a couple of things. A lot of people go to the electrolyte side of things. I'm losing too much sodium. It's a hydration thing. Yes, to some extent. So when we do lose sodium, it's going to impact the sodium potassium pump. So that's going to have influence on muscle contraction, keeping things really simple there. But there's also other aspects that could be causing cramping. When we have muscle contractions, there's a lot to do with calcium release to be able to allow our I'm trying to think of this in a really simple way for you guys, but allow basically what we know as cross bridges. So they're little tiny components in the muscle that actually lock on together to be able to pull across and create a contraction and bring the muscle together. That's all governed by calcium. And when we contract, we release calcium to be able to open up those sites where those filaments, if you like, or those parts of the muscle bind together and allow the contraction to occur. When we try to recover, though, we don't sometimes always get that calcium back into where it needs to go to then be released again. And if we're losing some of that calcium potentially through a number of processes that then leads to maybe sweating it out or losing it out of the cell, that's where we can have some issues. Also, if you take on too much fluid, that can also be a leader of cramps. Another one is overexertion. A lot of athletes who experience cramping in calves, quads, hamstrings, a lot of the time when we discuss it, when we're doing a bit of a session with them going, all right, what happened? How can we improve? What are the things we can do here? A lot of it comes down to just, I went out too hard and I didn't realize I was going out too hard. And then by the end of the race, particularly triathletes do this a lot, by the halfway point of the run, I've realized I've gone out too hard and now I'm blowing up. I'm starting to cramp. Why? Because the body's just struggling from a muscular endurance perspective. It just doesn't know how to keep those contractions going and going and going for as long as it can. You're going too fast for what you're prepared for. You drop the intensity a bit and all of a sudden we don't get cramp. It's like, well, it's just an overexertion thing. So heat has a factor. The dehydration aspect could have a factor. Things like sodium could have a factor. Overexertion can have a factor. I want to compile this into a video, so I'm going to go away for you. So that's not a definitive answer by no means, but I'm going to go away, take this as a bit of a project over the next while, compile as much evidence as I can in terms of what the research is saying, because there is a bit of and it's something that we'll probably debate for ages, I'm sure. Like finding the cure of cramps is going to make someone very, very rich in terms of being able to specifically say, no, this is what causes cramps physiologically. We know that through research, rather than, maybe it's a psychological benefit or a placebo type benefit from taking something like pickle juice. A lot of people say it works. Some people say it doesn't. Salt tablets, a lot of people say they work. A lot of people say they don't. Rather than having a placebo, let's actually work out what the cause of cramping is, and then we can go from there. But I think a large part of it is that preparation aspect, and avoiding overexertion from one thing is going to allow you to avoid a lot of cramping, and then some of these other components might be sort of supplementary factors too. Caleb, we'll get to your question here, so we'll bring it up on the screen and keep those questions coming in, because we'll keep rolling through as long as there are questions coming in. This one here. Got my Trinity bike yesterday. I did see that. I saw on your Instagram you got your bike. Looks pretty good. Got the seat at its lowest point and is still way too high. Does this mean I have to get the seat post cut? As we've talked about offline between me and you, when you go and get your bike fit done, this is something that Ken at Adaptive will be able to help you out with in terms of that. It might mean you need the seat post cut. But it also, depending, I don't think we've spoken about crank length yet, but it's something that when you get your bike fit done, Ken will talk you through crank length in terms of what is going to be best for you. I run really short cranks on my time trial bike. That was Ken's suggestion. I went down to 165 mil. So what that actually will do is, based on the same seat height position, that will change, obviously, the distance between where your saddle is and where the end of the pedal is, or the end of the crank is. So I wouldn't be going out and getting it done yet. I'd be waiting until you get the fit done, because then he's going to be able to tell you, all right, we need to cut the post X amount, or what he'll do on the day. I'm sure he'll have a spare seat post there that is shorter if he needs to bring it down. If it's a massive issue in terms of how much needs to be cut off, worst case scenario, you probably have to buy maybe a new seat post, but I don't think that should be too much of a problem. I think it'll be just a case you might have to just cut it a bit, but I wouldn't cut it before he's measured you up, because he'll give you a very specific sort of position where you'll be like, okay, this is how much I have to cut off and this is how much I can leave on there. You obviously probably want to leave yourself a little bit to play around with as you go, just so you can make your own tweaks to it. But it's the same with, I wouldn't be making too many changes to necessarily anything else until he's had a full look at how you fit on the bike, measured a few things up, and then got you in that really sort of refined position where you can make those clear calls. That was something that I didn't worry about getting where the spaces go on the stem. I didn't get any of that cut until afterwards. Basically, measured everything up, put everything in the right spot. We spent a good amount of time going through and getting that fit done, to a point where I went, okay, took it into the bike shop, had a whole bunch marked out. And even if you want to get him to just mark it with a pencil or something to just show you, he'll send you a printout of all your measurements of where everything needs to be, so you can take it to a bike shop if you need to. But then I just took it into the bike shop and said, this is how it needs to stay. Here's the measurements, just so you can double check. But this needs to be cut, this needs to be cut, this needs to be changed. Done. I like doing it that way because I'm okay at fixing basic things on the bike, like getting a chain back on and things like that, but I'm awful at doing the technical stuff. So I wouldn't worry about it. It would probably suggest the seat post has to get cut as a short answer, but without knowing how he's going to fit you, like I said, you could potentially actually have to put the seat post up if you go to a shorter crank. I don't know what crank you've got on there at the moment, so I wouldn't do it until after the fit, if that makes sense. So hopefully that answers that question there. Let me know, guys, if you've got any other questions that you want to ask in here as well. Appreciate you all jumping on this one. We've got, I think at the moment, we've got about nine watching at the moment. I did see at one point as high as sort of 12. So as much as those numbers by any means aren't massive numbers, I really appreciate everyone jumping on tonight to ask their questions and joining on the discussion about the Tour de France and things like that. It absolutely grew from the first one. I think we had 3 or 4 in the first one on the weekend. Now we're at sort of 12 as a max. Is definitely some improvement. Aaron, again, what have we got? Are you on Zwift? Yes, I am. Would be cool to do group training runs with the NJ crew. Yes, it would be. I haven't worked out. I probably just haven't spent the time yet working out how we can get it together. It is something that, now that you mention it, I think it'd be a really good one to do in terms of jumping on a live stream and going through whether it's going through a training session, whether it's going through a ride. I do have a mate that I train with from a footy perspective who's just getting into Zwift, and he wants to jump on a few rides. So it could be the perfect time to set a little thing up. A little bit of banter and all that around the group would be good. But obviously at the moment, when everyone's sort of doing their own stuff at home, might just be another good way to get a few people around each other, a bit of community happening, bit of fun as well. Nothing too serious. I'm not an amazing cyclist by any means. Josh says he's going to join in the Zwift rides, so appreciate that. I don't know about you, Will, but you might join the Zwift rides. We'll see how we go. I'm sure Caleb might be keen to join in too. But it's the type of thing that we can definitely look into it if we get some people interested. We can just do some group ride stuff and let me know as well what times a day. If you want to send me a message on Instagram or through YouTube, whatever it may be, if you want to leave in the comments here. What time of the day, what day of the week would you prefer? I'm currently riding on Zwift on a Wednesday night, and that's probably going to stay consistent for some time. Usually, I'm doing it after dinner, so about this 7. I'm normally riding on Wednesday night. I'm not tonight, obviously, because I'm on here. I rode yesterday because it was raining yesterday and I didn't want to go for a run. People ripped me on Instagram for that. But I normally would ride on a Wednesday night, probably similar time to we'd be jumping on here anyway. So it might be a good one to jump on, do a ride, maybe have some Q&A as well while we're riding. We'll sort of see how that works out. But if you do have a preference of what might work in, obviously everyone's training schedule is going to be all over the place and different, so it's going to be hard to accommodate everyone. But if we can get a reasonable, consistency of what most people can do, then we can start to build a bit of a community. We can get some of the guys in here, and hopefully some of the guys through Instagram and other people have commented, maybe if we can find a time that works for. I know a lot of my subscribers, when I look at the analytics, a lot of my subscribers are actually in the US and Canada. So if anyone's watching on the replay, because I know it's an awful time of day for you to be watching a live stream right now, if there's a time that works for you and you can do the conversion in terms of times, we can try and fit a few people in, because that would be pretty cool riding with people from all over the world. I think it'd be a pretty cool thing to do. Aaron says Wednesday night. Josh says Wednesday night. That might work pretty well. You're on the bike now. Good effort to be on the bike listening in. So appreciate that. Hope you're doing a nice cruisy session like you said you were going to be doing before as a cross training session. So, but yeah, again, guys, if there's no other questions, I might leave it there because I know we're just about to tick over 40 minutes on the live stream. So really great for you guys to leave your questions in and jump into the discussion and support the channel tonight. Really appreciate it. As always, if you do have any questions, feel free to contact me. I'll leave my Instagram and things like that up just at the end of the stream, just before I finish things up officially. So you'll be able to check that out if you haven't already. I know most of you guys in the chat have, but for anyone who's watching the replay, stick around to the very end and you'll be able to see my social links. They're always going to be in the description, and you can find them on the channel anyway. Pretty straightforward. At NJ_sportscience is the way to find me on Instagram. If you want to find me on LinkedIn, any of those platforms, and YouTube obviously as well. Caleb's up for the ride on Wednesday nights. Okay, this might be a thing. Wednesdays, we'll see how we go. Maybe it's Wednesday rides coming up in the next little while. We'll put that on the project list and see what we can do. Like I said, if there's any other questions, jump in now before we do jump off. Otherwise, thanks for jumping in the second one. Again, looking to do these pretty regularly over the next little while. If you know anyone who might benefit from one of these or has a question they might be interested in asking, please share the channel with them. Let them know that we're doing these probably more regularly. Let them know that we're potentially doing a Wednesday night ride with some Q&A as well. So definitely something that we're looking to build a little bit more on, and as the channel continues to grow, try to get more videos out as regularly as possible, but then also get more of these, because like I said last time, this is the best way to interact with you guys directly and sort of provide the most relevant information, is by doing it live and getting your questions and answering your questions straight away. I do have a quick one here from Tim. Thanks for chucking in your question. I don't know if you jumped in maybe late, but we've got, I'm training as much as I have ever done before, so running based, but don't feel like I'm improving. Any advice? Really, really interesting one that I hear a lot. Why I'm doing a lot of training, but I'm not improving. Without knowing your specific context, I'm going to take a little bit of a guess here, which I don't necessarily like to do a lot, but I'm going to take a little bit of a guess and say some part of your week you're going out and doing some longer Ks. Another part of your week you're doing maybe some tempo-y type stuff, and another part of your week you're probably doing some threshold-y type stuff. Whether you are or not, that's probably, or like if it's not threshold, it's some really, really high intensity, or what you might call speed work, or however you want to term it. That's a pretty standard running program for the most part. See that a lot. Why does it not necessarily provide long-term benefits? Because what we have first and foremost is what we call the law of diminishing returns. So at some point, if you just do the same thing again and again and again, you're going to get to a point where you're not really going to improve too much more, because we're going to hit a plateau, and that's what it sounds like you're doing. When we get to that point, the easy thing for runners to do is do one of two things. Let's go more volume, or let's run more. Because if I'm running as much as I am, which is essentially more volume, if I'm running as much as I am now and I'm not seeing any benefit, I need to run more times a week, because if I run more, that should make me better, right? But then also going out, and when I say the volume side of things, is volume in a single session of, I'm only doing an hour and a half on a Saturday, I need to go out and do a 2-hour run on a Saturday instead. Not always. We have the data, and I don't have it on me to pull up, and obviously like client confidentiality, things like that. But from work in the lab looking at endurance athletes, we have a number of case studies that basically show a couple of patterns in athletes. The athletes who usually complain of this type of thing, if I'm plateauing, I'm doing all this training, I've lifted my volume, I'm doing more runs a week. Typically, that athlete is going to benefit and see an improvement if they basically cut their training week in half. So don't do as much. You might still run 5 times a week. You might still run 6 times a week. But you basically cut everything right back. So when you go out, instead of going and doing an hour and a half, you're only doing 45 to 50 minutes. Instead of going out and doing long intervals, instead in like 10 minutes on, 5 minutes off, 4 times, for example, doing a big session, you're going to go out and do a shorter, sharper session. And that's where, for the most part, those athletes need a boost at the top end, because what they've been doing is this very race-specific preparation, threshold in and around, tempo type stuff, that they're pushed up where their threshold is in relation to their VO2 max. 95% of their engine. There's no room for them to develop the rest of their engine. I always talk about this. Anyone who knows any of my stuff and has heard me talk about this before, I talk about it as a car engine. If you've got a V6 car engine and you already have 6 cylinders built into it because you've done this race-specific preparation and your engine size isn't any bigger, you can only fit 6 cylinders in. Sure, you can tune it up a little bit and you get these 1% gains by making the parts a little bit more efficient. But if we build you a V8 engine and you're running on 6 cylinders, that's going to be more powerful anyway because it's a bigger engine. Then we have room to fit those cylinders in, and that's where you can sort of see the gain. That's where you get the improvement. So what I would suggest is, first of all, the easiest way to identify exactly what you need to do would be to go and get lab tested. Obviously, that's not a reality at the moment because of the COVID situation. The next thing I would suggest you to do is have a look at what is the pace difference. This is a really simple analysis you can do. What is the average pace difference between what you would run for a 5K time trial and what you would run for a 2K time trial? If they're reasonably close together, it's going to be different for everyone based on how fast or slow you are. But let's say, for example, if you run your 5K at about 4-minute pace, pretty sort of moderate, but then you can only run at like 3:45 pace for your 2K, that suggests to me that your threshold's about 4, maybe 4:10 pace, and your VO2 max at 3:45, pretty close too. So that's a pretty close gap. I'd probably say you're about 90% of your VO2 max on the most part. Oxygen consumption is going to be a bit individual. I get that, but for the most part, that would suggest that you need to maybe cut out some of the thresholdy type work you're doing in and around threshold, doing 1K repeats, that type of stuff for a period, 4, 6, 8 weeks, however long you want to do it. Go and do some really high intensity VO2 max style intervals. 1-to-1 work to rest ratio, 95% of your VO2 max. So if your 2K time trial is 3:45 pace, you want to go and run at like 3:50, 3:55 pace, holding that for anywhere between 2 to 4 minutes on. Equal walking recovery, can't stress that enough. Equal walking recovery, so 2 minutes running, 2 minutes walking, 2 minutes running, 2 minutes walking. Accumulating 12 to 20 minutes of working time. Give it 4 to 6 weeks. I can guarantee you'll start to see a little bit of an improvement. Give it 10 to 12 weeks and you'll definitely start to see something boost up. If anything, you'll see a bigger gap start to emerge from your 2K average pace to what your 5K average pace is. Once we get that bigger gap, then you can go and train that 1K repeat again. But you'll find that doing 1K repeats, you should be able to go and run, instead of a 4-minute K pace in around threshold, you might be able to run a little bit quicker now. That's going to help drag things up. So that's how we're going to see a bit of an improvement. And like I said, it's not necessarily by running more or doing more volume in a session. It's not doing more sessions. It's by cutting out some of that volume and focusing on the quality at the top end to change the top. Because for the most part, endurance athletes are really good. That's what we do. We do aerobic capacity. We're really good muscular endurance machines. We can just perform a movement again and again and again. By doing more of that, and this is my pet peeve with endurance athletes going into the gym and just doing like 3x15 or 3x20 at really low load, or they're just doing body weight, is that we're just doing the same as what we would do if you go out for a run instead. You're going to do hundreds of steps. There's your muscular endurance. Get in the gym and lift some high intensity. That's going to be a different stimulus, and it's going to provide a different stimulus on the body to improve our top end capacity. Because if we lift the top end, we've got more room to move underneath. Another analogy, other than the car analogy I like to use, is if the roof's only as high as it's built. If I have this roof that's built here, like I've got pretty high ceilings in this house, so it's a bit different. But if I've got this roof here and I'm on a trampoline and I'm jumping at the roof, unless I reposition the roof higher, I'm going to hit my head pretty quick. And that's like threshold being very close to your VO2 max. You're going to hit your head pretty quick in terms of, I don't have much room to move, so I don't have much room to improve, really. I know that rhymed and I didn't really mean to do it. But if I move the ceiling, though, by moving the top end, cut back some of the volume to give you the time to recover and adapt. Doesn't have to be forever. Just for, like I said, 4 to 6 week period. Just cut back some of the volume and bring in some of this really high intensity work as a substitute for your intervals. You can keep maintaining some volume, some long slow. Just don't do as much of it. You'll notice that things go through the roof. We actually, at work, we had a professional triathlete a couple of years ago who was just a volume machine. Cut his training load basically in half. Gave him some really high intensity work because he was really deficient at that top end. We built the top of his engine. I think he went from a VO2 max like 60 to like 70 in the space of 12 weeks. It's pretty insane. He's an absolute machine now. But it's the type of thing that we did that momentarily to get that little change in performance, and then we brought back the volume later, and it capitalized on that gain. So hopefully that answers your question, Tim, in terms of why am I plateauing. That's a very, I guess, generic example, but I would probably say that I see that in 80-85% of the clients I work with when I'm in the lab. That is the case study that I see time and time again. There is variation in terms of their subtleties. what heart rates we're seeing for that athlete, what pacing we're specifically seeing for that athlete. But on the most part, that is a profile that I see time and time again. And what I've just given you there in terms of the fix, and if I went through that a bit too quick, I am going to leave this up as a replay so you're able to go back and watch that bit again. I might even take this part out and use it as a highlight video and just talk about specifically. But it's the type of thing that if you go through and work out where that VO2 max is by doing a 2K time trial, understand where you might want to do both, a 5K time trial as well, but understand how that matches with your 5K time trial. Then, all right, is the gap really closed? I need to do some VO2 work at 95% of whatever your 2K time trial pace is, 1-to-1 work to rest, 2 to 4 minutes on, 12 to 20 minutes of working time. It's a method that I've proven time and time again that works for athletes, and it's going to boost that upper end up, and it's going to allow you then, because you boost the upper end up, that's where we're running faster. That's going to allow you submaximally to run a little bit faster for a little bit longer, and that's where we're going to see that breakthrough of the plateau. Hopefully that answers the question. If you could leave a thumbs up if you are still in here, because I know it's a bit of a lengthy response. Leave me a thumbs up in the chat if that sort of answered what you were talking about. But yeah, definitely a common question, and a common, I guess, issue that a lot of athletes face is this: I'm stuck, I'm in a plateau, and it's what do I do now because I'm not going anywhere? Do I do more or do I do less? What do I do? It does depend a little bit on your scenario, but hopefully that sort of gives you a bit to think about anyway. And if you want to continue the discussion, go through things in a little bit more depth, more than happy for you to reach out either via Instagram, YouTube, whatever it may be, to have a bit more of an in-depth chat of your personal scenario. We can set up a call, whatever we need to do to talk through how you can specifically do it. But there's a good starting point for you anyway. I might wrap it up there because I know I've been on for quite a while. It's coming up almost to the hour mark, which I didn't think I'd be on here for this long. So thank you again to everyone who's commented. Cal was saying Zwift race, maybe. I'm not a great cyclist. I have a pretty cool road bike now that makes me go fast, but I'm not a great cyclist. I do want to do a little bit more as the weather warms up and being able to get outside. I want to ride a bit more, but running is my main game, and running fast and sprinting is the real passion of mine in terms of my footy umpiring. But the cycling stuff is definitely fun. The triathlon stuff is definitely good as well. So again, thanks to everyone who jumped on the live stream tonight. Really appreciate it. The replay will be up in full, and then I might break it down the parts as well, because I know there's a lot that we covered here in terms of some of the sections. I'll put up as separate videos if you want to revisit any of those. Jump on them there. Other than that, I'm going to leave it there. So that is it for tonight. Thanks again for everyone who jumped in. I will let you know when the next one is happening, and we'll start working on maybe some of these Wednesday rides. I'll keep you posted through YouTube, Instagram. Like I said, all the links are going to be on this next page that I'll bring up in a second. But thanks everyone for everyone jumping in. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. It does help support. Share it with someone that you might think you would get something out of this. That's how we're going to grow this. And the more people who join in, the more questions we get. You never know who's asking a question that might be something you were thinking as well, or vice versa. So if you could share it with someone that you think might get something out of it, much appreciate it. Other than that, I'm going to leave it to there, and yeah, we'll see you in the next one.